The acrid scent of smoke clawed at Morel's throat, mingling with the raw, bitter sting of betrayal. Around her, the ruins of her home kingdom smouldered, a skeletal cage of stone and ash, where once proud towers had kissed the heavens. The night was unforgivingly cold, but the fire that had gutted her past boiled hot in her veins, burning fiercer than the flames that consumed the citadel. Her body was stiff, bruised from the guard's violent cast-out, but it was the deeper wounds beneath flushed cheeks and trembling hands that crushed her more relentlessly. The cruel brand of traitor seared into her very soul. She stumbled through the desolate wilderness beyond the ruined gates, each jagged step punctuated by the ghostly echo of her father's last broken words and the quiet betrayal of those she'd called allies. The faint scar running alongside her left cheekbone throbbed with fresh pain, a sharp reminder of the dagger forced into her back, figuratively and literally. Whatever pretenses had once tied her to safety to hope were now reduced to ash, like the kingdom reduced under the burning wrath of unseen enemies, and perhaps foes close to home. Her ragged breast clouded the cold night air as she pressed on, alone amid the wild tangle of trees thrusting needle-thin shadows across her path. The world she had known was gone, the title she'd held meaningless. If she was to survive, it would be by sheer, stubborn resolve. The same stubbornness that had refused to fade, even as betrayal hollowed her from the inside. Her emerald eyes, deep as the ancient forest she now wandered, scanned the darkness for any sign of sanctuary. Somewhere, she knew, the Alpha King held dominion, a fierce, untouchable man with wolves at his command, steeped in myths and whispered warnings. Theron, the name was a hymn of danger and power, whispered in fear and reverence. To him, she was nothing but a damned traitor, the daughter of a fallen house, the enemy's bride sent to crumble beneath his roof. And yet, when the borderlands swallowed her raw and ragged frame, when exhaustion clawed at her very marrow, it was his wolves who caught her, before the night swallowed her whole. Morel's heart hammered in a brute rhythm, half captive, half survivor, as rough hands pushed her forward, not gentler than the grasp of fate, but no longer the cruel betrayal of former hands. The pack watchers with eyes sharp as winter ice circled, their primal growls low in the distance. She felt them, the beast minds probing for weakness, for the crack to exploit, and yet there was something else, something new and unsettling in their silence. She did not belong here, and yet she had crossed into Theron's domain, cast out by the ruined past and pulled toward a future written in shadows and claws. At the threshold of the Alpha King's fortress, Theron watched her sturdy, bruised, defiant-like, a fragile flame, daring to glow in a tempest. His storm-grey eyes narrowed, caught between the impulse to throw her back into the hell she escaped, and the reluctant spark of something more indistinct and dangerous. "I don't want your pity," Morel's voice when she spoke was hoarse but steady, sharpened by the bitterness of loss. "I'm no one's prisoner." She met his gaze without flinching, though every part of her screamed for mercy. Theron said nothing, only gestured to the pack standing sentinel behind him. The wolves watched with a hunger that bordered on reverence and suspicion. "You are no one here," he said finally, voice low and tethered with iron. "But you are under my protection for now." A cruel promise, but one she had no choice but to accept. Inside the Alpha King's great hall, the air was heavy with the scent of burning pine and cold stone, the flicker of torchlight casting jagged shadows that danced against towering walls decorated with ancient banners. Morel's footsteps were ghost-like on the cold flagstones as she moved through the cavernous room, silent and unwavering. Her slender fingers, calloused from hardship and strange hands, traced the dust and detritus she swept away, scrubbing away the weight of history and scorn alike. The courtiers, opulent in their silks and jewels, their eyes sharp as daggers, watched her with thinly veiled contempt. Whispers fluttered like fragile wings in the vast room. "The traitor's daughter. Why hasn't the king cast her out already?" a touch too calm for one who walks amid wolves. None dared speak openly, but suspicion clung to the air like a persistent fog. Muriel's deep forest green eyes kept their quiet, calm, never faltering, never pleading. This was her exile, her penance. And if the Alpha King's wolves could watch without tearing her apart, maybe there was a secret strength beneath the fragile shell she presented. She did not find it in defiance, but in the steadfastness of small act, the quiet brushing of dust from the carved throne steps, the gentle repositioning of a fallen tapestry. She noticed how the wolves shifted restlessly at the edge of sight, their wild eyes tracking every subtle movement. Their cold breaths fogged the air, raw and primal, filled with a tension that seemed to coil as tightly as the sinew beneath their thick fur. They were guardians, warriors, hunters, and something in Morrick's pack was not used to a spirit like hers. Soft, small, yet unyielding. From the shadowed alcove, Theron's stormy gaze bore into the room, flickering like a storm about to break against distant cliffs. He felt the restless energy of his pack like a living thing stretched, taut by this unexpected presence. None had dared to approach so closely before. None had moved with such quiet purpose, despite the scorn cast upon her. "What do you see when you look at her?" The deep rumble of Caius's voice, his second in command, broke the silence as he stepped beside Theron, eyes dark and unwavering. Theron's jaw tightened, a prisoner who refuses to break. Caius shook his head slowly. "No, not prisoner, not broken. That girl. She carries a calm in her that unsettles even the wolves. It's not weakness, Theron. It's something else. Something dangerous if you disregard it." Theron's eyes flicked back to Muriel, who knelt by the throne, absently smoothing dust from the cold stone, with the grace of someone tending a shrine rather than a condemned soul. She did not look up as the murmur of courtiers filled the great hall, nor did she seem to notice the penetrating gaze of the Alpha King watching from the shadows. "Why?" he whispered, more to himself than to Caius. "Why does she not cower?" Caius shrugged, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "Because she's not afraid of death. Or perhaps, because she's already been dead and returned." Theron clenched his fists, the muscles in his forearms tightening like taut cords beneath weathered skin. The pack growled low, a death chant wrapped in fur and fangs, but even they hesitated tonight. It was as if the beast inside them recognized something ancient, something wild and unyielding in this human woman who moved among them untouched. She left the throne room without a word. Her ruddy brown hair, stamped with streaks of copper that caught the torchlight, flowed like a river of fire behind her slender but resilient figure. The faint scar along her left cheekbone, a mark of battles, both seen and unseen, seemed to glow briefly in the dim light before she slipped silently out of sight. Theron remained where he stood, his storm-grey eyes reflecting the flickering flames and the countless unspoken questions hovering in the charged air. His wolves circled him tighter, the pack that never questioned their king's instinct, now twisted by unease and unexplainable curiosity. That night, the Alpha King found himself alone amongst his restless pack, pondering the silent strength of the woman who had entered his domain, a wounded princess bearing a past woven with treachery and loss, and a future he did not yet understand. Something had shifted beneath the cold stone and burning pine, and neither king nor wolf could deny it. Night had woven its heavy cloak across the forest, as Muriel slipped toward the wooded border where the wild whispers of the pack's territory thrummed in the chill air. The ever-watchful wolves peeled away hesitantly from her path, their growls quieting, breaths shallow, but a single sharp sound had drawn her here, a pitiful whine, half lost in the rustling leaves, and the distant chorus of nocturnal creatures. Her green eyes, keen yet soft, traced the source of the cries beneath the shivering boughs. There, nestled in a bed of dead leaves and twigs, lay a small wolf pup, trembling and blooded, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. The faint scar along her cheek, twitched with old memories of pain and survival. The pup's eyes wide, amber, brimming with fear, clung desperately to her presence as she knelt beside it. Myrelle's hands trembled as she reached to cradle the fragile creature. The wound was fresh, a jagged tear on the pup's front paw, where the blood still welled bright and hot. Her fingers, nimble despite the weight pressing on her chest, began cleaning the grime and dirt away with water she had collected from a dew-dampened leaf. Humming softly, a melody drawn from the distant days of her childhood, an ancient tune buried deep in her memory, the sound vibrated gently from her throat. The pack had always been uneasy around her, their primal instincts locked tight like iron cages, but now, as her song rippled through the night, a palpable stillness settled over the trees. The wolves drew closer, their fierce eyes less glazed with suspicion, more curious, almost reverent. Her voice was threadbare, but unwavering. "Shh! It's all right, little one. I'm here." The pup shivered beneath the delicate care, its frantic trembles slowing into tentative calm. The hiss of pain softening where Myrelle's fingertips traced small circles around the wound. Her breath, steady and sure, despite the pounding turmoil inside, mingled with the crisp scent of pine and earth. Darkness stretched beyond the branches, a malevolent puppeteer. Yet here, near her touch, a fragile sanctuary bloomed. Unseen by her, shadowed on the edge of the clearing, Theron watched with clenched fists and a storm of contradiction swirling in his storm-grey eyes. The sight of his Althus pack, those proud, formidable beasts of muscle and fang, breaking their stoic guard to watch her, this woman, once the enemy, now the unlikely healer, was a blade twisting deep within him. His mind roared louder than the wolf chorus in his veins. How could he, permit such tenderness when the world was so raw with betrayal and pain? Yet the pack's aggression softened tonight, stripped away like bark around a tender shoot, revealing a side none had dared glimpse. And it was she who had coaxed it forth with nothing but a whispered song and a steady hand. "They don't fear her," the Alpha King muttered to himself, voice low and rough as gravel, "nor do they resist." His chest tightened. They listen. Theron's beast, the raging tempest in his soul, growled low, the sound a bitter clash against his calculated restraint. Yet, the reasoning part, the part carved, sharp, by years of rulership, recognized what would be lost if he cast her out. Now, the pack was restless, a tempest barely contained within stone walls. She was the unexpected balm on that wound. "Why?" he demanded of the night. The answer would not come easily. It could not. Back at the border, Myrelle eased the pup onto a soft bed of moss she had gathered. She fashioned a makeshift splint from slender branches, wounding her fingers with thorns as she wrapped strips of cloth, torn from her own blouse. The pup nuzzled faintly against her palm, its pain still throbbing but less urgent. Her heart clenched at the sight, mirrored in its amber gaze, a desperate need to survive, to belong. She was no stranger to survival's harsh rhythms, and maybe that was the thread woven between them. Fractured, battered, and hidden in pain, yet fiercely unwilling to yield, the pack encircled her, silent but present. The scent of wild musk and fur filled the air, not a trace of menace, only something unspoken passing in the space between her breath and their quiet watchfulness. One of the elder wolves, a massive black beast with streaks of silver in its thick mane, stepped forward, placing a heavy paw near the injured pup. A growl rumbled deep, but not threatening. More a soft reassurance spoken in the language of old bonds. Myrelle's gaze met Theron's across the distance, the firelight painting dust-like sparks in his disquieted eyes. She knew he was watching even without the throne room's grandeur to frame him. "You're braver than you realize," she whispered to the pup. "And so are you, Theron." The silence that followed was heavy with consequence beneath the watchful moonlight. something fragile and dangerous blossomed. She had moved from invader to caretaker without a single word, and that shift carved new paths none dared to chart. As dawn's first tendrils touched the forest floor, a new unease rose, not from mere wounds, but from a far older storm wrapped around Morel's bloodline, whispered in shadows, and tied to magic thought long lost. Weeks passed, breaths measured between stolen moments and stifled tensions, and then, beneath the old oaks where roots tangled like skeleton fingers around the ruins of the forsaken throne, the secret unfolded. Theron stood rigid, watching the woman step carefully through the sacred ground, where none but the chosen dare tread. The air was thick with history, silence pressing down like a weight forged from centuries of pride and power. There was fear, too, fear of the unknown, fear of the darkness that lingered just beneath the surface of the kingly lands. "You realize what you ask," Theron's voice was rough, a low command sharpened by reluctant respect. "This place does not suffer impostors." Morel met his storm-grey gaze squarely. Her forest-green eyes shadowed with a fierce resolve that no exile could extinguish. "I am no impostor," she said quietly, the words more declaration than plea. "There is a fire inside me, one that belongs to the old bloodline, the one you fear. I can prove it." The Alpha King's hand paused, fingers curling involuntarily, the weight of years pressing on them both. He wanted to deny her, keep her away from a power that he could barely comprehend, but the soft glow that sometimes kissed her skin, like embers beneath her flesh, had already whispered a truth he could not unhear. "Then show me," he said, voice low but deadly earnest. "Show me what you hide." Morel knelt at the crumbled stone altar, the very heart of the old throne's power. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but anticipation. The cool breeze swirled, tugging at her ruddy hair, streaks of copper flaring brighter as if ignited by the very air around her. "I don't know if it's magic," she confessed, voice barely a breath. "Only that sometimes when I touch the old stones, I feel something awakening beneath my skin." Theron crouched beside her, the scent of rain-damp earth and pine heavy around them, the only sound the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a lone wolf. Her fingers spread slowly across the altar's worn surface, tracing the intricate carvings, the ancient sigils of her family, lost to time, but sleeping still beneath the scars of war. A soft light, thin and tentative as moonlight on water, began to pulse beneath her touch. It flickered along the lacework of stone and seeped, warm and alive, beneath her skin. Theron's breath stilled. His beast, raw and primal, thrashed beneath his ribs like a caged storm, equal parts awe and dread striking through his bones. This was not mere power. It was a calling. "You have the blood," he whispered, voice tight as steel wire. "The old throne casts its shadow long, and it will not be denied." Morel's clear gaze did not waver. "Then what now?" she asked softly. The Alpha King rose slowly, every movement weighted with the 1,000 battles held inside his frame. "We watch, we learn, and we prepare for what must come." Because in the growing light of dawn, the past had not only caught up with them, it was weaving their fates tighter than either dared admit. In that silence, broken only by the subtle glow beneath her skin and the steady thrum of the pack watching from the shadows, the fragile hope of something more took root, something fierce and unyielding, something that might just save them both. The chamber of the Alpha King was usually a place of order, a sanctum where loyalty was shown without question and strength measured in silent, unwavering devotion. But today, that calm was fractured, shards of suspicion glinting harshly beneath the gilded surfaces. The council had gathered, without invitation, an unspoken storm, swirling in the folding shadows beyond the throne. Theron knew what was coming long before the first icy gaze landed on Morel. She stood just inside the great chamber's archway, the warm light from torches framing the subtle pull of her jaw. the faint scar along her cheek catching the flicker. Her deep green eyes, usually so unreadable, were steady now, even as the whispers began like a cold drip of poison. Even the pack, usually silent sentinels in the background, were alert, ears twitching and bodies taut. The court had spoken, and their words carried the weight of old grudges and fresh doubts alike, bending like iron threads around her fragile claim to this new world. Theron's voice was low, almost a growl, but firm enough to slice through the murmurs before they could build into a roar. Enough. A cold laugh broke from Eldrick, one of the most senior council members, his lined face a mask of disdain. Enough. King, we serve the realm, and that means no spies within our walls. This woman, he spat the word like a curse, stands here as your consort, yet her loyalty is as shifting as the autumn winds. Once a princess of a fallen throne, now a foreigner tangled in your pack's laws. Tell us, what proof do we have that she walks with us, not against us? Myrelle felt the gaze of every noble pinning her like a hunted wolf. Each accusation was another chain, closing around the fragile freedom she had carved for herself. The green of her eyes did not flicker with anger or defense. She stepped forward with a quiet grace that only deepened the silence. I am no spy, she said softly, voice never rising above the hush of silk sliding over stone. But I will not parade my innocence to those who see only shadows where there are none. The court shifted. A wave of unimpressed murmurs swelling into sharp, disbelieving whispers. Theron stood, massive and imposing, the storm grey of his eyes hardened like flint. Myrelle has given me no reason to doubt her. If any here are uncertain, let your loyalty be to the crown, not to long-dead kingdoms or petty fears. Another councillor, older, his form stooped but voice-biting, sneered. Fear is a prudent counsellor, your majesty. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats hide beneath the kindest faces. His words were a needle aimed squarely at Myrelle's heart, dark and unforgiving. The careful judgment, the veiled accusations, the silent questions hanging thick between them. But the thing is, she expected this. She had been cast out once before, branded a traitor, not for what she had done, but for what others feared she might still be capable of. Here, under a different sky, with different rules, the story was repeating again. And she did not have the grand speeches or the silver tongues of the councillors who doubted her. She had only this, her own steady resolve, and the truth she carried silent under her skin. Without another word, she turned. There was no fight left in her this day, to argue with shadows and whispers. The soft click of her boots on stone echoed through the hall as all eyes locked on her retreating figure. Murmurs erupted, disbelief, outrage, confusion, and then a low, guttural growl swelled from the darkness beyond the throne, not from any man, but from the Alpha King's wolves, hidden in the corners where no light dared reach, not one, but a low chorus of warning. The gathered nobles froze, the unspoken message clear. Her place was not simply given, it was guarded, fiercely, unyieldingly. Theron's eyes found hers across the room, the storm behind them, settling into an unbreakable calm. He did not call her back, nor issue an order to stay. Perhaps it was enough that she left on her own terms, that the wolf pack beneath their feet stirred with the promise of protection. She pushed open the heavy door to the corridor beyond, and exhaled the breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. I will bear their distrust as I have borne worse. She told herself. But I will not be weakened. The hiss of the council's whispered displeasure behind her was cut clean when Theron spoke again. Carrying just enough weight for all to hear. If anyone harms her, let them answer to me. That was a promise neither of them took lightly. Later, the castle's restless stillness swallowed the footsteps that led her away from the throne room, though the lingering scent of wood smoke and iron lingered in the air between them. The walls seemed to close around her, every shadow a reflection of the questions that had been thrown with such careless cruelty. But even as her heart twinged with the familiar dull ache of exile, the quiet thrum of the Alpha King's wolves rose with her own steady pulse, a reminder she was never truly alone. The air was thickening with a storm elsewhere, one they hadn't yet seen, but she felt it, felt the shift, like the pressure of distant thunder, just beyond the horizon. When the sudden clang of the warning bell rang out, moments later, shattering the rare moment of stillness, it was the sound of blood on stone. A threat had breached their walls, an enemy loose among them. The castle murmured with tension as guards poured into the corridors, their armor jarring like the heartbeat of war itself. Theron found her in the quiet hall outside her chambers, a shadow among shadows, stoic yet braced. The wolves circled closer now, their eyes burning with raw hunger. For the fight ahead, his hand was firm when he reached for hers. No questions, no accusations, just the steadfast connection between them, unspoken but potent. "We must," he began, voice even, though the strain behind it was clear. "They say your chamber is safest," she interrupted. "Until this passes." She surprised herself with the steadiness of the words, though the admission behind them trembled. Like the fragile bridge between them, safe was a foreign language. Neither of them spoke often. Theron nodded, his hand lingering on her wrist, a tether grounded in the storm. Together, they crossed the threshold, the room closing around them with slow inevitability. It smelled of cedar and leather, the walls lined with trophies of battles past and trinkets of peace tentatively earned. The fire, low and golden, cast flickering shadows over the sharp planes of his face. For a long moment, they simply stood, the silence dense and weighted. She swallowed against the tightness in her throat, the sudden intimacy of shared space, making the hard edges of survival slip just slightly. "Why?" Her voice was more question than accusation, breaking the stillness like a slow crack along frozen ice. "Why don't they trust me? Why does the pack growl at my name like I'm prey?" Theron exhaled slowly, the tension folding away into something softer, almost vulnerable, because the past is a ghost no one can shake. "And the wolves." His eyes darkened. "They smell fear as easily as blood." Myra looked down at their joined hands, the rough strength in his grip surprising her. She thought she was the only one weathered by ghosts. "Do you fear me?" she asked quietly, voice almost lost in the flickering firelight. He met her gaze then, for the first time, not as the Alpha King or the predator guarding his realm, but as a man weathered by storms, worn yet unbroken. "For a long time, I feared what I saw in myself," he confessed, voice low, raw, "that I was more beast than king, that I could lose everything to the hunger inside. And what about now?" His gaze softened imperceptibly, just enough to crack the armor around his heart. "Now I'm more afraid of what will happen if I let you walk away. Not because of the council or the past, but because I don't want to lose what might still grow between us." The quiet weight of his words pressed against the fragile distance their walls had kept. She let herself breathe in that space between them, where the cold, heavy chains of judgment could not reach. "I don't know if I'm ready to be saved," she whispered. "Not yet." But her fingers slid from his hand, tracing slow, hesitant patterns over his forearm. "Maybe I'm tired of running from the wolves." Theron stepped closer, the heat of his body a balm to the raw edges of her own fractured soul. Not a king, and not a prisoner. The smoke of the fire curled between them, warm and tangible. The storm in his eyes quieted, and the scarred woman who had come seeking refuge felt the first fragile spark of something like hope. It was not a surrender. It was a beginning. Hours slipped between whispered confession and shared silence. She told him of the shattered kingdom she'd once called home, the faces lost to war, the betrayals that had burned deeper than any sword. He spoke of a childhood forged in shadows, the loneliness of a crown heavy with expectation, and the wild animal inside him clawing for release and control in equal measure. There were no promises made in that small chamber, only truths laid bare like raw sinew. Each confession bled away layers of fear and mistrust, knitting fragile threads of understanding where once had been only walls. When dawn finally crept through the high windows, pale and tentative, they were no longer two strangers bound by circumstance. They were two broken souls, slowly shaping something fierce and unyielding, something that might yet save them both. Myrelle hadn't meant to overhear the whispered conversations in the quiet corridors of the fortress, but the labyrinthine halls seemed to carry secrets, like a living thing, folding them into shadowed corners where ears hung desperate and willing. It was well past midday when she found herself lingering just beyond the door of a guard's chamber, her keen eyes catching the subtle twitch of a gloved hand signaling caution. She had come to seek dry boots, nothing more, when voices low and urgent pulled her steps from retreat to halt. "They think the king's trust makes him soft," one voice hissed, thick with contempt and poison. "It's that woman, the traitor from the fallen kingdom. She's a snare, a weakness to be exploited. The fortress will fall from inside, and we will rise." Another growl back. "Theron's no fool. But the king's blinded by mercy. I have the dagger ready. I just need the moment." Myrelle's heart hammered fiercely. The guard speaking was Fontaine, a man she had seen often by Theron's side, trusted and lethal in equal measure. For him to betray Theron was unthinkable, but the words were clear. She pressed a hand against the cold stone beside the doorframe, grounding herself. The air was thick with dread, but something inside her sharpened, something fierce that refused to be a victim again. She had learned far too painfully that survival meant action. Rushing through the hallways, boots echoing like thunder in the quiet, she sought Theron, finding him by the war room, poring over maps and reports with the weight of his crown etched deep into his brow. The room smelled of worn leather and pine smoke, the heavy curtains pulled back to catch the harsh sunlight. "Theron," her voice cracked with urgency, "you must listen. There is a plot. Fontaine, one of your closest guards, plans to kill you." His storm-grey eyes lifted slowly, disbelief, and then hardening suspicion flashing across his face. "Fontaine," he asked. "Why would he betray me?" "Because he sees me as a threat," Myrelle said quietly. "They want to shatter this pact from within, use your trust against you. I overheard their plans, see even the dagger he carries for you tonight." Theron rose, the resolve in his spine unfurling like steel, into the tension between them. "Why would you risk yourself to warn me?" Her green eyes met his without flinching. "Because I have nothing left to lose, but I cannot watch you fall." The beast that rumbled beneath his ribs stirred, sensing the charge in the air, the danger and the truth alike. From the shadows just beyond the war room's doorway, a low growl rolled, a deep, guttural sound that spoke of primal instincts and allegiance. It was Theron's wolf, now sitting by Myrelle's side, its amber eyes alight with fierce wariness, a silent sentinel protecting the woman who had saved the king's life this day. Theron's lips pressed into a thin line, contemplating, before he moved with a decisive edge worthy of his crown. "Gather the guards I trust. Fontaine will be dealt with, swiftly and without mercy." Myrelle felt the weight of his gaze as he studied her, not with suspicion, but with a growing respect tempered by wariness. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, stronger than she expected, as though acknowledging she was no longer simply a visitor in this world of wolves and kings, but a part of it. The hours that followed were a blur of strategy and preparation. The guard Fontaine arrested without bloodshed, though the seething hatred etched in his sneer was a bitter reminder that loyalty in Theron's world wore many faces. Myrelle remained close to Theron's side, the wolf curling protectively against her leg, its presence a testament to the king's unspoken trust. Together, they faced the threats both without and within. Yet even as the danger dispersed, a heavier truth waited in the shadows, ready to unspool the fragile threads binding them. It was during a rare moment alone, beneath the sprawling branches of the courtyard's ancient yew tree, that Morel found the courage to reveal what she had uncovered in the deep recesses of her memory. A truth that intertwined their destinies in ways neither expected nor wanted. "Theron," she began, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of revelation. "There's more. You need to know. About my past and about us." He listened, the steady warmth in his gaze inviting her confession, a space where truths could be spoken without the usual armor of caution. "You remember, I told you about my betrothal," she said, tracing a faint scar along her wrist as if mapping the old pain. "The alliance that was supposed to unite our kingdoms before everything fell apart." Her green eyes bore into his, searching. "That betrothal wasn't just political. It was a pawn in a darker game, a conspiracy that enslaved both our families to hidden enemies. The betrayal that shattered my kingdom, it was tied to forces that sought to keep us divided and weak." Theron's brow furrowed deeply. "You mean it was no accident that my realm and your bloodline have been ensnared in this plot from the start?" Morel nodded, her voice low but steady. "Yes, I was sent away to be a traitor in the eyes of both our people. But it was never meant to be permanent." He absorbed her words with the silence, between the fraying edges of disbelief and reluctant understanding. The mountains of old pain, the scars painted across their histories, suddenly stood, not as walls between them, but as the foundation for something new. "So we've been fighting ghosts of a war neither of us chose," Theron murmured. "Enemies made of shadows and lies. And yet here we are," Morel said softly. "Two people who could have been enemies, now bound by a past none of us fully controls." The wolf's low breath brushed against her ankle, a quiet note of allegiance in the heavy stillness. Theron reached out, brushing a strand of copper-laced hair behind her ear, his fingers steady and alive with unspoken promises. "We need to face this together," he said. "No more pawns. No more lies." In that moment, fragile trust stirred between them, a delicate shoot sprouting through the cracked earth of their troubled pasts. Days stretched into weeks, and with them came both healing and hardship. Morel threw herself into the rhythms of the pack, the pain of the past slowly loosening its grip with every dawn spent training beside warriors who had once looked at her with cold suspicion. The forest became her sanctuary, the scent of moss and pine, the taste of fresh water on her tongue, the burn of exertion in her muscles, each movement a reclaiming of strength lost to betrayal and grief. Theron watched from the edges with a cautious hope, his own walls quieting as he saw her resilience grow, not just in body, but in spirit. The pack's approval came slowly, but the quiet presence of his beast, resting at her feet during their gatherings, spoke an undeniable truth to all who watched. Morel was no longer an intruder, but chosen. On days when doubt whispered in the wind, when courtiers and soldiers alike murmured behind hands about the traitor who stole the king's favor, Theron was there, not with sharp words or protective fury, but with a steady hand grazing hers in the silence, a reminder they were not alone in this battle. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Morel found herself beneath the stars, muscles pleasantly aching from a day's trial. Theron settled beside her, the wolf curled, loyal and relaxed, his amber eyes softening in the moonlight. "Do you feel the change?" he asked, voice low as the breeze. She nodded. "I am not who I was when I first crossed your threshold." "No," he agreed, "nor am I the king who cast you out." Together, they sat in companionable silence, the weight of whispered wars around them fading beneath the quiet strength of their union. Yet the world beyond the walls still pressed close with tests of loyalty and whispers of rebellion, swirling like storm clouds waiting to break. Their bond would be tried again and again, by envy and fear, by the ghosts of their past and the uncertain hope of the future. But beneath it all, The ember burned steady, fierce and unyielding. The day came when the throne room, long shadowed by mistrust and scar, was reclaimed. The great hall stretched before them, its vaulted ceiling arching like the steadfast ribs of the kingdom itself. Golden light spilled through stained glass windows, throwing fractured colors across flags worn by seasons of war and peace's elusive dance. The pack gathered their faces, a mixture of curiosity and wary admiration. Courtiers and leaders of the council filled the carved seats, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of beeswax candles. Myrel's heart hammered like a ritual drum, but there was no fear now. Only the quiet certainty of standing beside the only man who had ever seen her broken and chosen to stay. Theron entered, first regal and commanding, yet with an ease born, not of arrogance, but hard-won humility. His storm-grey eyes swept over the crowd before resting on her, like a declaration, and then she stepped forward, her slender form aflame against the marble floor. The scar along her cheek caught the light, worn no longer as a mark of shame, but as a testament to survival. At her feet lay the great wolf, silent, unwavering, the visible bond of mate and king, protector and chosen. The murmur softened, respect threading through every glance. Theron's voice rang clear and strong, carrying the weight of a vow unspoken but deeply felt. This queen stands with me, not as a broken heiress, not as a shadow of a fallen past, but as the future we will build together. Myrel's gaze met his, unvoiced promise of loyalty and strength shared between two souls who had been tempered by fire and forged anew. The pack howled softly, the sound rising like a benediction beneath the vaulted sky. In that moment, the throne room was no longer a place of exile or fear. It was a crucible where a new kingdom was born, one held in the fierce pulse of two hearts bound against darkness. And as their eyes locked, the storm had finally settled, leaving only the promise of dawn.